Let's get started. Florence Griffith-Joyner, September 21st, 1998. Florence Griffith-Joyner was found unresponsive in her California home. She was 38 years old. No warning, no prior public history of illness, no explanation that fully satisfies. And here is the part that should stop you cold. Her world records from the 1988 Seoul Olympics still stand today, untouched, unbroken, by every sprinter who has ever lived. At the time of her death, Flo-Jo had been retired for nearly a decade, but her times had never aged. The 100-meter record, 10.49 seconds. The 200-meter record, 21.34 seconds. Both set in a single summer in Seoul. Both still the fastest times ever recorded by a woman on this planet. Modern sprinters train with better science, better nutrition, better equipment, and they are not close. That gap has never been explained to anyone's satisfaction. The official cause of death was positional asphyxia during an epileptic seizure. The problem is that she had no documented history of epilepsy. The diagnosis emerged posthumously, assembled from a single event, with no medical record to support it. Her husband initially resisted an autopsy, which complicated the picture further. Toxicology reports found no drugs in her system. The medical file, such as it is, raises more questions than it closes. What makes this stranger still is the timing of her retirement in 1989. She stepped away abruptly, citing personal reasons, just months before mandatory out-of-competition drug testing was formally introduced to track and field. She was never sanctioned, never formally accused, but the proximity of that departure to that policy change has shadowed her legacy ever since, fairly or not. The fastest times ever recorded by a woman died with their owner. No successor has approached them. No governing body has satisfactorily explained how a healthy 38-year-old with no medical history suffered a fatal seizure in her sleep. The records remain, the questions remain, and the silence where the answers should be remains loudest of all. Hank Gathers, March 4th, 1990, Loyola Marymount University. The crowd was loud, the cameras were on, and Hank Gathers, 23 years old and in the middle of one of the most dominant individual seasons in the history of college basketball, collapsed on the court during a game. He did not get back up. He was pronounced dead shortly after. And the cruelest part is that everyone in that building already knew something was wrong with his heart. Gathers had achieved something no player in NCAA history had ever accomplished before or has accomplished since. In the 1988-89 season, he led the entire nation in both scoring and rebounding simultaneously, averaging 32.7 points and 13.7 rebounds per game. He was the projected lottery pick, the future franchise player, the kind of talent that appears once in a generation. He was also, by the time he collapsed for the final time, a man playing with a known cardiac condition. In December of 1989, Gathers had collapsed during a game for the first time. He was diagnosed with exercise-induced heart arrhythmia and placed on a medication called propranolol to regulate his rhythm. But propranolol dulled his explosiveness on the court. According to reporting at the time, Gathers reduced his dosage without full medical authorization because the drug was slowing him down. Within weeks, he had returned to full competitive play. Within 3 months, he was dead. The subsequent legal battle told the story the headlines did not. His family filed a $32.5 million wrongful death lawsuit against Loyola Marymount and the team's medical staff. The suit alleged that university doctors had cleared Gathers to play at full intensity despite knowing the severity of his condition. The case was settled out of court, the terms were sealed. The full account of who decided what and when was never made public. Loyola Marymount went on to make the Elite Eight that season, playing in Gathers' memory. His teammates wore his number. The nation watched and mourned. But the sealed settlement means that the institutional decisions surrounding his death, the choices made by adults with medical degrees about a 23-year-old man's heart, remain officially unresolved. He didn't just die. He died inside a system that saw what was coming and cleared him to run toward it anyway. Davey Moore, March 21st, 1963, the Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena. Featherweight champion Davey Moore climbed into the ring against Sugar Ramos and by most scorecards won 10 of the 15 rounds. He was better. He was faster. He outboxed his opponent for the majority of the fight, then he died anyway. Not from a knockout blow, not from a single catastrophic punch. He died because of what the ring itself did to him every time he fell into it. Moore was 29 years old and at the height of his powers. He had successfully defended the WBA featherweight title twice and was considered one of the top pound-for-pound fighters in the world. His footwork was precise, his combinations clean, his ring intelligence well above average. He was the kind of champion who was supposed to age gracefully to dictate when and how his career ended, The sport had other plans. In the final rounds, Ramos knocked Moore into the lower rope repeatedly, 6 times by some accounts. Each time, the back of Moore's head absorbed the strand directly. The rope was legal, the referee saw every impact and allowed the fight to continue. Moore's corner had opportunities to stop it and chose not to. He died 4 days later, on March 25th, from a brain hemorrhage, caused not primarily by Ramos's punches, but by the structural design of the ring he was fighting in. A different rope configuration, a different corner decision, and he walks out of that building. Bob Dylan wrote the protest song Who Killed Davey Moore within a year of his death, pointing fingers at the referee, the crowd, the manager, the boxing industry itself. The song was not wrong to spread the blame. Moore's death triggered Senate hearings on boxing safety in the United States. No federal oversight of the sport existed at the time. The hearings produced public outrage. They produced very little lasting reform. He died not from the sport he loved, but from the infrastructure built around it, an infrastructure that prioritized spectacle over the survival of the men performing it. The people whose decisions contributed to his death faced no legal accountability. The rope that killed him was replaced. The system that designed it was not. Marco Simoncelli, October 23, 2011. The Sepang International Circuit in Malaysia. Marco Simoncelli was 24 years old in his second full season of MotoGP and widely considered the most electrifying young talent in motorsport. His qualifying lap the day before had placed him third on the grid. On lap 2 of the Malaysian Grand Prix, his rear tire lost traction in turn 11. His bike slid out from under him. What happened next took less than 2 seconds to become irreversible. Simoncelli's sliding body and machine were struck by the bikes of Colin Edwards and Valentino Rossi. Rossi was not just a colleague, he was Simoncelli's closest friend and mentor in the sport, a 9-time world champion who had taken the younger Italian under his guidance. The collision was not reckless, it was not caused by poor judgment, it was the geometry of a sport where the margins between competitive and catastrophic are measured in fractions of a second, and where those fractions occasionally close all the way. Simoncelli had won the 250 cubic centimeter world championship in 2008 and was expected by nearly everyone in the paddock to challenge for the Premier class title within 1 to 2 seasons. His riding style was aggressive in the specific way that only future champions are aggressive. Not reckless, but fully committed in corners where other riders calculated their options. That style was not a flaw. It was the source of everything that made him extraordinary on a motorcycle. Rossi has spoken publicly about Simoncelli's death as the most traumatic experience of his racing career. He completed the season, he won more races, but he has returned to that October afternoon in Malaysia in interviews repeatedly in a way that makes clear it has never fully resolved. The number 58 was retired by Gresini Racing. His father, Paolo, now runs a MotoGP team carrying his son's legacy into a sport that continues without him. When the quality that makes someone a champion is the same quality that puts them in danger, the line between greatness and mortality becomes very thin. Simoncelli rode on exactly that line. On one October morning in Malaysia, the line moved. Alex Lowe, October 5th, 1999. The south face of Shishapangma in Tibet, one of the 14 8,000-meter peaks on Earth. An avalanche came without warning and without preference. It killed 2 members of a 3-person expedition instantly. One of them was Alex Lowe, 40 years old, described by Outside Magazine not as one of the best climbers alive, but as the best, a designation that represented the consensus of the entire mountaineering community, not a marketing claim. To understand what was lost on that face, you need to understand what Lowe was. He had summited Everest, K2, and Kangchenjunga, among others, with a technical precision that other elite climbers described as operating in a different category entirely. His endurance, his route-finding instinct, his ability to move fast in conditions that stopped other elite alpinists were not incremental advantages, they were generational ones. The expedition to Shishapangma was not, by his standards, an extreme undertaking. He was there for a ski descent of a technically moderate face. The mountain did not adjust its behavior accordingly. The third member of that expedition was Conrad Anker, who survived. Lowe's body was not recovered in 1999. The glacier absorbed it. In 2016, 17 years later, the ice released him. His remains emerged from the mountain almost perfectly preserved, and the discovery reopened grief that had spent nearly 2 decades settling into something manageable. His sons, who had last seen their father when they were small children, were now adults. They buried him as men. His son Max Lowe made a documentary about the discovery titled Torn, released in 2021, that examined both the loss and the complicated family history that followed. Conrad Anker married Lowe's widow Jennifer and adopted his 3 sons. That fact is offered here not as tabloid detail, but as context for the scale of the rupture that 1 October avalanche created. A family was not just bereaved, it was entirely reconstituted around an absence. The mountain didn't know who Alex Lowe was. That is the part that resists every attempt to find meaning in what happened. Not a flaw in his technique, not a miscalculation, not the sport consuming someone who pushed too far. Just indifference, absolute and total, from something that has been falling off that face since long before anyone was there to witness it. Steve McNair, July 4th, 2009, Nashville, Tennessee. Steve McNair, 36 years old, two-time Pro Bowl quarterback, co-MVP of the 2003 NFL season, was found shot to death in his condominium. He had been shot 4 times, twice in the head. The woman who shot him, his 20-year-old girlfriend Sahel Kazemi, was found dead beside him from a single self-inflicted gunshot wound. Police ruled it a murder-suicide within days. The mechanics of what happened that morning were not in dispute. Everything surrounding them was. McNair was still an active professional football player at the time of his death. He had signed with the Baltimore Ravens and was preparing for a comeback season after a run of injuries. His career, by any measure, had already been extraordinary. He had led the Tennessee Titans to Super Bowl 2014 in January 2000, losing 23-16 to the St. Louis Rams in a game that ended with the most iconic single play in NFL history, a tackle on the final yard line that separated him from immortality. He was named co-MVP of the entire league in 2003, alongside Peyton Manning. Kazemi had reportedly told friends in the days before July 4th that she believed McNair intended to end their relationship. She had received a driving under the influence citation 2 days before the shooting, with McNair in the vehicle. She had purchased the gun used in the killing 2 days before she pulled the trigger. The sequence of decisions compressed into those 48 hours has never been fully reconstructed in public because the person who made them did not survive to explain them. McNair had a wife and 4 children. His relationship with Kazemi was not publicly known before his death. The lives revealed by the investigation were not the life his public image had constructed, and that gap between the man the world thought it knew and the circumstances of his final days is where the unease around his story lives. How does a man survive a Super Bowl down to the last yard, absorb every blow a 20-year professional career can deliver, and then be destroyed by something that never once appeared on a highlight reel? The danger, it turns out, was never on the field. Ronaldo and the final he never played. June 12, 1998. Saint-Denis, France. 6 hours before the World Cup final, the greatest striker on the planet had a convulsive seizure in his hotel room. He was 21 years old. He was the reigning FIFA World Player of the Year for 2 consecutive seasons, 1996 and 1997. By the time kickoff arrived at the Stade de France, he was on the field anyway. Brazil lost 3-0. And Ronaldo, the man who was supposed to define that tournament, looked like someone who had no business being there at all. The day of the final produced one of the strangest administrative moments in World Cup history. Brazil's official team sheet was submitted to FIFA with Ronaldo's name absent. Then, in the final hour before kickoff, a second sheet was submitted with his name restored to the starting lineup. Both submissions are documented in official FIFA records. The Brazilian team doctor, Lidio Toledo, confirmed publicly that Ronaldo had suffered a convulsive episode and had been taken to hospital, but stated he had been medically cleared to play. That clearance has been questioned by physicians and journalists ever since. The detail that transforms this from a medical incident into something more uncomfortable is financial. Nike held a reported $160 million contract with the Brazilian national team, a contract in which Ronaldo's participation was commercially central. A Brazilian congressional investigation subsequently examined whether commercial interests influenced the decision to play him. The inquiry found irregularities in how the situation was handled. It found no definitive proof of wrongdoing. The full record of who made the final decision and on what basis was never established publicly. Ronaldo recovered completely. He won the World Cup in 2002, scoring twice in the final against Germany in a performance that went some way toward closing the wound of 1998. His career became one of the greatest in football history. None of that resolves the earlier question. He survived, he came back, he won. But the question of who decided to put a man who had just experienced a convulsive seizure onto the world's largest sporting stage, and precisely why that decision was made, has never been officially answered. Some questions don't get closed, they just get quieter over time. Tom Simpson, July 13, 1967. Mont Ventoux, Provence. The temperature on the exposed upper slopes exceeded 50 degrees Celsius. Tom Simpson, 29 years old, the first British cyclist ever to wear the yellow jersey in the Tour de France and the reigning BBC Sports Personality of the Year, was 1.5 kilometers from the summit of the climb they call the Giant of Provence when he fell from his bicycle. Spectators rushed forward and put him back on it. He rode a few more meters, he fell again. He died before the helicopter reached him. To understand what Simpson meant to British cycling, you need the full list. Paris-Roubaix in 1961. The Tour of Flanders in 1961. Milan-San Remo in 1964. The World Championship in 1965. He was the dominant British road cyclist of his generation in a sport where Britain had almost no tradition of success. He was beloved, recognizable, celebrated. He was also, like nearly every professional cyclist of the 1960s, using performance-enhancing substances as a matter of professional routine. The autopsy confirmed amphetamines and alcohol in his bloodstream. Amphetamine tubes were found still in the rear pocket of his jersey. Doping in professional cycling in 1967 was not a scandal. It was endemic, normalized, and largely conducted in the open. Riders called their substances their petit bombes. Team staff administered them without hesitation. No formal prohibition with meaningful enforcement existed. Simpson did not die because he was uniquely reckless. He died because he did exactly what the sport had taught him to do. And on that particular day, on that particular mountain, in that particular heat, the load exceeded what his body could carry. His death directly triggered the introduction of mandatory drug testing in the Tour de France. A memorial stone now marks the spot on Ventoux where he fell. Every year, professional cyclists ride past it, some of them on substances not yet detectable by modern testing. The system that killed Tom Simpson has not been dismantled. It has been updated, refined, and moved into laboratories. When an entire sport is built on a foundation that consumes its best athletes, is the death of a champion a tragedy, or simply the bill coming due? Samia Yusuf Omar. April 2012. The Mediterranean Sea, somewhere between Libya and the Italian coast, a 21-year-old woman who had represented Somalia at the 2008 Beijing Olympics drowned attempting a sea crossing in an overloaded boat. She was not competing. She was not training. She was fleeing, trying to reach Europe so that she could find a coach, a track, and the basic conditions required to become the athlete the world had briefly noticed and then entirely forgotten. At the Beijing Games, Samia Yusuf Omar had finished last in her 200-meter heat. She crossed the line more than 2 seconds behind the field, in 32.16 seconds, wearing a full hijab in 32-degree heat in front of 90,000 people. She did not win a medal. She was not close to winning a medal. But the image of her running, alone in her lane, committed entirely to a race she had no realistic chance of winning, in colors almost no one watching had ever seen on an Olympic track, was the kind of image that travels. Somalia had almost no sporting infrastructure. She had almost no coaching. She ran anyway. After Beijing, Samia attempted to reach Europe through overland routes, traveling through Ethiopia, Sudan, and Libya before attempting the sea crossing. The journey took years. She was trying to reach a place where proper training was possible, where she could work with a real coach and qualify for London in 2012. Survivor accounts from others on the same boat confirmed she did not make it. Her death was not confirmed publicly until months after it occurred, assembled from testimony rather than official notification, because no system was tracking her. Her story was later documented by journalist Luca Rastello and became the basis of international reporting on athlete refugees. That reporting came after she was already gone. The world that had briefly televised her in Beijing had no mechanism for following what happened to her next. She didn't die at the peak of her career, she died trying to find a place where her career could actually begin. She was given a global stage in 2008 and then abandoned entirely the moment the broadcast ended. That is not a mystery with a hidden answer. It is a system working exactly as designed, which is the most uncomfortable fact on this entire list. Junior Seau. Junior. May 2nd, 2012. Oceanside, California. Junior Seau, 43 years old, 12-time Pro Bowl linebacker, and one of the greatest defensive players in the history of the NFL, shot himself in the chest. He left no note, but the night before he had called his ex-wife, his children, and his mother. And the shot to the chest was not a detail without meaning. He wanted his brain preserved for examination. He knew, or strongly suspected, what decades of professional football had done to it. That decision, made in his final hours, was the last thing he ever got right. Seau played 20 NFL seasons from 1990 to 2009. He was the kind of player who defined a position, not just statistics. His combination of speed, instinct, and physical force produced a style of linebacker play that coaches still reference. In his final years, the people close to him documented a different picture: erratic behavior, memory failures, emotional volatility, and a depression that did not respond to the interventions around him. These are the hallmark symptoms of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a degenerative brain disease caused by repeated head trauma. CTE is only diagnosable after death. He could not have received that diagnosis while he was alive to do anything about it. The National Institutes of Health examined his brain posthumously and confirmed the presence of CTE. That confirmation arrived in a context shaped by a decade of growing evidence that the NFL had known about the link between football and brain disease far earlier than it had publicly acknowledged. The league's own internal research committee had reportedly suppressed findings connecting the sport to neurological damage as early as the late 1990s. Seoul played for 20 years after that research existed. The congressional investigation and the ESPN and Frontline documentary League of Denial, both released in 2013, documented the suppression in detail. In 2013, the NFL settled a class action lawsuit brought by more than 4,500 former players for $765 million without admitting fault. Seoul was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2015, 3 years after his death. His family accepted the honor in his place. The league that had spent years denying its product was destroying men's brains put one of those men's names on a bronze plaque and called it a tribute. He shot himself in the chest so they could not bury the truth with him. That was not despair. That was evidence. And every subsequent development, the NIH findings, the congressional testimony, the settlement, the Hall of Fame induction has confirmed that the evidence was good. Junior Seau understood exactly what had been done to him. His final act was making sure the record reflected it. 10 names. 10 careers that ended before anyone was ready for them to end. But look at what connects them and you will find something more disturbing than coincidence. Almost none of these athletes were simply unlucky. Florence Griffith-Joyner left behind records and a medical file full of gaps. Hank Gathers was cleared to play by people who knew his heart was compromised. Davey Moore was put back in a ring built to maximize damage. Marco Simoncelli rode a sport with margins thin enough to kill the best in the world on a routine lap. Alex Lowe died on a mountain that offered no exceptions for talent. Steve McNair survived everything football delivered and was destroyed by the life constructed around it. Ronaldo played a World Cup final hours after a seizure while a commercial contract waited. Tom Simpson died of a system that called its poisons tools. Samia Yusuf Omar drowned trying to find a place that would let her compete. Junior Seau shot himself in the chest to make sure the damage could be measured. These are not just athletes. They are the clearest mirror sport has ever held up to the institutions, incentives, and indifferences surrounding it. Subscribe if you want to keep looking at what the mirror shows. The peak of a career is supposed to be the safest place. The cameras are on, the contracts are signed, the whole world is watching. And yet, again and again, that is precisely where the story ends. Maybe the spotlight was never protection, maybe it was just the best lighting for what was always coming.